Hey internet, Swag here. Do you want to do circuitry but don't know where to start? Never done coding before? Or you're just looking at all the wires going, sheesh, that's a bit too daunting for me? Well, have no fear, because with the introduction of the new menu, it is time to take things from the top and start at the beginning. This video will tell you all about the basics and lifeblood of any circuitry graph, executions. Let's get to it. To do circuitry, one requires their maker pen, which can be found in your backpack. The most simple connection in circuitry starts with an execution and uses that execution to perform a function. To give an example, let's make a setup to turn on and off a light bulb. In our palettes in Circuits V2, we can find ourselves a point light V2. And to the right of that, a toggle button V2. To wire these together, we go to our tools, switch to the wire tool, and attach one input to an output by dragging it between them. In our case, we wire our pressed output to the turn on input and the released output to the turn off input. You can see when a wire is transmitting an execution by how it lights up when it does so. Now that we know what executions do, let's have a look at some of the easiest ways to generate them, the CV2 gadgets. The CV2 button is the simplest way to generate an execution. It fires an execution from the pressed pin when, well, pressed, and from the released pin when you let go of the button again. The toggle button is incredibly useful for, well, toggling things. It functions identically to the normal button, except that it stays pressed by itself and can be released with a second press. A trigger volume can be useful for either making a silent button or seeing when a player or object has entered a certain area. It keeps track of not only player entering and leaving, but can also keep track of objects entering and leaving. An important thing to keep in mind for bug fixing is that when an object is held by a player, it counts as both a player and object entering at the same time. If this is not your intended behavior, make sure that you move the object inside of the trigger volume without it being held by a player. Interaction volumes are very nice for things like door handles and other kinds of interactables, hence the name. Not only does it execute when grabbed, but also when someone starts or stops hovering their hand over it. Trigger handles are there to make custom CV2 powered tools for players to hold. Combine them with a clamp, piston or rotator gizmo to make all kinds of interesting CV2 interactions. When held, it transmits if you're pressing or releasing your primary action button, the same button that shoots a paintball gun for example. It also sends out executions for picking up and dropping the handle. As stated before, executions perform commands when entered as inputs. What a chip or gizmo does is often spelled out on its input. In case of this rotator, you can see how it starts and stops when it receives executions to its respective play and stop inputs. Pistons are very easy to wire up and open up the way to making the simplest form of CV2 doors, sliding doors. Unlike rotators, they have a maximum distance that you can change by configuring it, so that the piston does not move further than that. If you want to control multiple executables with the same execution, you can wire them in sequence. For once a chip is done with its execution, it will continue that execution on the other side of its circuit board. Unless delayed, anything wired in sequence like this will execute in the same frame, so it moves at the same time. You can adjust the max distance of your piston with the configure tool. You can configure the max distance input and set it to whatever you want. If you feel like a distance of 1 meter is too long for your intended use, you can also enter decimals like 0.5. Close your keyboard or drop your maker pen to confirm your selection. Some executables might require extra inputs before they do anything. This velocity set chip, for example, requires a target, which can be either a player or object, and a direction. In this case, we will wire up the player that pressed the button as the target, and we get a direction by using a vector gadget. If you're executing a chip with missing inputs, you will cause an error. If everything is wired up, however, this setup should send me upwards when pressed. One of the most important ways of guiding executions in the right direction is the if chip. It takes a true or false value, also known as a boolean, and when given an execution, sends the execution from the top output if true, or the bottom output if false. There's many ways to make comparisons into true or false values, and this is the cornerstone for many kind of circuitry setups. But we will go more into depth on booleans in the next video. Now I hope this tutorial was useful and you learned a thing or two. But even if it seemed too basic for you, just remember that mastery is achieved through many small lessons. You know what they say about a journey of 1,000 miles after all. If you're eager to learn more, please subscribe to the channel for future tutorials. I'd love to see you tune in again when we will talk about booleans, how to get them, and what to do with them. For now though, please use your newfound knowledge wisely, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!